Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Rebecca. I'm part of the subcommittee of the Early Career Researchers Subcommittee. We organized this talk for you today, and we're having Anji Miller as our speaker. Anji is a technology transfer professional with more than 18 years experience of working with early stage translational research. Her current role at LifeArc involves working with academic and charitable establishments to identify, cultivate, fund, and commercialize early-stage healthcare technologies, focusing on rare diseases and advanced therapies. Anji holds a Master's in Science in Human Molecular Genetics and a PhD in Cancer Genetics from Imperial College, as well as a Master in Science and Certificate in Intellectual Property Law from Queen Mary, University of London. She is a certified project manager, Prince 2, registered technology transfer professional, and a certified licensing professional. Anji currently leads the LifeArc Autumn Technology Transfer Training Fellowship Program, an initiative designed to train and assist scientists to become technology transfer professionals. She is also a co-founder of Global Equality, Diversity, and Equality in Technology Transfer, an initiative with a mission to raise awareness and promote EDI in the technology transfer sector. So thank you for being with us today, and welcome, Anji. Before we start the talk, I would just like to explain how to submit your questions. You can send them directly through the live chat on YouTube. You will need to sign in to send them there. Alternatively, you can send an email with your questions to adminteam@bsgct.org. And thank you for being with us today.
Thanks, Rebecca. Okay, let me just move to the first slide. It's a bit of a delay. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to actually talk about this topic because it's something that many people who know me know that careers and skills are one of the key things that I talk about, as well as EDI and technology transfer. I move on to the next slide because the thing is, like, you all know my background, what I've done. I had to include this slide because when I saw it, it was quite funny, and it does resonate, I know, with most of you who are in the lab as early career researchers or fresh from the lab. For me, it's been many, many moons since I've been in the lab, but because I work so close with science and because it was an amazing time that I had in the lab, this slide resonates because I remember how many years that I spent with certain aspects not working, where you're just thinking, what are you doing? And then when it does work, you realize how much you love what you are doing. This talk, we are going to talk about, finding the middle ground, the career options that you can have as early career researchers. There are a plethora of different roles, which I'll touch on as well. But as a technology transfer professional, I will touch on my career choices, my role, and also let you know a bit more about technology transfer. The take homes from this, I think with this session, my aim is to really, over the next 40 minutes or so, really to get you thinking, what to consider, what parameters to consider when you are looking at your career options, realizing that you really do have options. And it's not just now, you will have options throughout your entire career. And it's very different to, a decade ago, where it was, you're in the lab or you're not. There are many things to consider. And I'm hoping that what I will do is tease out and get you exploring and really internalizing and thinking what works for you. Okay, so, the topic of, the topic of this talk talks about, a career in academia or industry and finding the middle ground. I just wanted to put things in context, and I want to do this like for the first couple of slides to ensure that we're on the same, really in the same ballpark and understand that we're talking about the same thing. When we talk about middle ground, we're talking about a balance. And although we're going to focus mainly on industry or academia, it's not mutually exclusive to other things that you could balance. So for example, I'm a scientist. I still see myself as a scientist. although I no longer wear a lab coat and go on and work at the bench. But the thing is, like, science, so do you practice science at the bench or outside of the lab like I do? And then when I talk about also some of my career choices that I made in the journey, it's really where are you one of these that follow the passion, or is it just a purpose? And this really resonates down to the culture, the sort of culture that works for you. But I wanted to mention these because the thing is, these are things that factor all the way through. And if I don't get to touch on them again, when you are thinking about making your career choice, or you are evaluating what you do next, these do factor on there when you're talking about middle ground. When we talk about science careers, I mentioned, like, you know, as a scientist at the bench and the scientist outside, there wouldn't be enough space on here if I mentioned like the different types of scientists that you can be, or science researchers. When we talk about science careers out of the lab though, I could capture, and I found a slide that I could add a couple more. There are many more than this. But the thing is, some of the things that you would consider and some of the careers that you really can use your technical background and apply them to this new career as a scientist, but out of the lab. I had to put in technology transfer because that's the sector that I'm in. But the thing is, as you can see, really it's using the skills that you've gained through your study, through your experience, and adding to it. And it's really where you get many that are very, very close to the science, but it is where they no longer hold a Gilson, they no longer wear a lab coat. But the thing is, they do ensure that the same impact, the same journey, the same passion that made you enter, you know, and study science and become researchers, they still drive that, they still have that, and they still support that. As I mentioned before, I'm a technology transfer professional, and I know that you've had talks on technology transfer, so I won't go into loads and loads of information around it because that could be a talk in itself, and I do love talking about it. But I did want to put it into context for some of you who may not recall what it is, or may not appreciate when I'm using this term, what I'm referring to. Technology transfer is an umbrella term, and it really refers to the journey of discoveries from the bench. So anything that's discovered by a researcher, all the way through the development pathway to get to the patient. And that involves all the regulatory routes, you know, for example, the clinical trials that need to take place, the marketing, it's really the refining, all of that. So it's really a long distance. And as you know, research from the bench to the bedside, a lot of the time can take average between 12 to 15 years, depending on where you refer to. You're talking about many individuals, many different skills that are applied, but they all fall under that technology transfer umbrella. A lot of the time when we talk about technology transfer though, sometimes we're talking about where you have a technology transfer office within a university or an institute, and it really is that early stage evaluation. But when you're looking really what technology transfer does, and particularly in roles like mine, it takes it a lot further. So I've mentioned really that it's an umbrella term. And I think it's important, I wanted to put these slides in because they do feed into the considerations that you'll make when you are deciding, is there a middle ground? And because I'm using technology transfer as an example, it is where you need to understand the skills that make up this particular profession, or that will lead in and tap in. You have to tap in if you're practicing as a professional within this sector. It has your technical skills, so whether that's biological or chemical sciences, it's a combination and a marriage between science, law, and business. And it sits right in the middle, and depending on the role, it could be more on the scientific side, more on the business, more on the law, but it's not set. Within your role, it could change, and that depends on the sector that you have. I couldn't talk about technology transfer without actually referring to IP, or intellectual property. And I know, again, that you would have had talks on intellectual property itself. This is something that you need to realize they are all connected. They're not in isolation. And this slide is quite good because it's a word cloud covering some of the assets that fall onto this intellectual property, which is a collective term again for the actual assets that will be developed and really be the currency of the research that's developed within the labs, and that the technology transfer professional will be curating, developing, and also commercializing. Again, this slide, really to put it into context with the research that you may be doing. You may be a basic researcher, you may be a translational researcher. Obviously, basic research is more granular. Translational is when you start to actually apply it towards humans and also closer towards the clinic in what does it really mean in real terms, the human body, the physiology. So technology transfer is really bridging, taking technology from basic all the way through to that product, that intervention that will make a difference. I mentioned the development pathway again, and this slide shows an example for, say, for example, a small molecule. And you can see the main stages: basic research, drug discovery, which is the medicinal chemistry stage. Then you have the preclinical, ensuring that it will work and it's safe. And then it goes into clinical trial, where you go through the different phases: phase 1, safety and efficacy, and then carrying all the way through to all the phases where you get the late stage. But as a technology transfer professional, you will be tapping into all of these. You'll be working with all of these individuals. And it may be that you are helping to pave the path, so ensuring that it is a reasonable route, or it may be where you are actually speaking to those individuals. So I hope that sort of explains technology transfer, and it's a whistle-top tour really of going through and reminding you of what it really is and putting it into context. I mentioned that I will tap in and occasionally refer to my role and the career decisions that I made along my journey to really help with this discussion of finding the middle ground, which I believe I have found for now. I couldn't do that without actually touching on LifeArc, who I work for. As you know, I'm a senior business manager there. And LifeArc is a healthcare charity. It is where it's completely independent. This means that really, based on the aim, which is patient impact, it is that we can do whatever we need to do to actually impact those patients and get technologies from those that we work with, for example, charities, medical research organizations, industry and academia, getting them to the patient. And this is really quite important for me, because the thing is, one of the earlier slides I talked about passion and purpose. For me, it's both. It's a mixture of the two. But the passion, which is patient impact, is very important for me, because that's something that I didn't want to compromise when I decided not to be at the bench any longer. I decided to become a scientist because I wanted to make a difference. So it was important that when I was trying to find my middle ground, and when I was looking, okay, what I would do next, that still held. That wasn't something that was negotiable. It was really where it had to be there. And fortunately for me, you know, in the role that I'm in and the roles that I've had even prior to this, that could sit there all the time. So at LifeArc, briefly, what is TT at LifeArc? Because the thing is, obviously, we work with interface of all these sectors. It means that I do use all the skills, the legal skills. I speak with the lawyers, IP lawyers. I speak with those who are thinking of licensing or acquiring the technologies that we work with. But the thing is, we do this, if you wanted to put it into pigeonholes, it really is with translational advice. So a lot of advice in how you proceed with things, how you develop, working with the researchers, helping them to really see the perspective of someone who is developing their science, and they've got these amazing discoveries, but what does it really mean in real terms? Protecting the technology, and this is through IP that I've mentioned, and managing that technology, because once you protect it for a purpose. And it's really to ensure that you can really incubate and develop it to the point that when it comes to taking it to market, it is attractive for whatever business or commercial end that will take it to market themselves, because it's not usually the researcher who does that. It's also making sure that If there needs to be financial support because LifeArc funds, it is that we can do that. And it is where we will evaluate and help evaluate others with any translational funds that the technology is sound, and also the path that's predicted in the proposed research is appropriate for that technology. But one of the other things that we do, and this is quite important to me because the thing is it's something that I lead on, and it does touch on this talk, but also anyone considering a profession in technology transfer. We have fellowships, which I'll touch on later on, to help scientists who are in the lab, possibly like yourselves, who are thinking, okay, how do I get from here to working with technology in that way? My role, the reason why I put this slide in, again, it's touching on finding that balance. I went through a process really, and it doesn't happen overnight. When you're in the lab and you're conducting your research and you're thinking, okay, what next? Do you carry on with postdocs? You're asked, probably several times per year, do you want to have your own group, whatever. It is where, for me, the reason why I put this in is because I wanted to show the variety of my role as a technology transfer professional, because these are some of the things that when you're on the other side and you're in the lab, you don't really get to see, or you don't really normally get to hear unless you speak to someone in the sector and you have time for them to sit down and really explain the variety. Here you can see that there's only a couple of bullet points, but the thing is, each one of these is really quite detailed. So translational funding, I mentioned this before, some of you will have applied for or supported applications for funding. There's basic research grants that go through, but then also there's translational funding. And those who have been involved with translational funding will know and understand the detail that you need to have, and the forward thinking, the foresight to really see how this technology will translate in or impact a patient group. Knowing the size of the patient group, that landscape analysis piece, understanding who the competitors are. It's really where it's quite detailed, and then also time with the Gantt charts, the costing, the expertise that you have to bring in, because if as a translational researcher, you won't necessarily be a clinician, and you may need to bring in that expertise. You may even need to have a project manager. So the thing is, with my role, I help the researchers like yourself and like your supervisors who are applying for translational funding and need to have that support in actually building, the appropriate proposal, the team for any of their research, but also the actual strategy, whether that be for the IP or whether it be for commercialization or whether it be for patient participation, because we are talking about translational research. LifeArc funds these sort of projects, but also we also advise and we sit on panels who are actually really judging and analysing these sort of projects. I talk to a lot of individuals about careers, whether this be through the fellowship program that I lead or through others that are thinking of transitioning in some shape or form, or considering they're at a juncture. For example, industry, academia. It's like finding the balance in, are they changing sector? Are they changing field? I mentor a lot of individuals on this sort of topic. And this is something that through lived experience, but also understanding the sector and the changes that are happening in the sector, which are quite encouraging. It is where it's part of my role. It's now part of my role within LifeArc. It's something that I'm passionate about, and it's something that I'll touch on, that if you find a role and it doesn't look absolutely 100% what you want, sometimes you can bring in things that you're passionate about that really do help drive the aim of the establishment. And this is one of the parameters that you can consider when you're trying to find this balance and having a look, where can you find the middle ground? For me, as an advanced therapy specialist, it's really where that is my background. And I'm lucky enough that part of my role means that I lead on a certain aspect of that for example, 3 gene therapy hubs that LifeArc has supported with the MRC and BBSRC. These are centers of excellence that will lead to manufacturing and help translational researchers in this area. For me, I'm the skills lead for this actual initiative. Not only do I work closely with the initiative and those individuals within there, but I also help in the fact that my passion, one of my many passions with skills and upskilling, I can incorporate that within there. I mentioned IP management before, and I have training in that, and it's a key part of technology transfer. So it's really where my role also involves advising on that. And then another one of my passions, and it's something that really does resonate with the experience that I've had as well, and that is promoting science, ensuring that those who are entering the profession understand really what they can do, but also the fun that you can have with it, but also ensuring that it's inclusive, accessible to everyone on the same level, and if they need additional support and the chance to take advantage of opportunities, they can do. So you can see it's a very diverse role, and summarizing this was quite difficult because there are some aspects that I couldn't include in here, but it was important for me when making my decision that I had a role that really did not only use all my hard skills that from my experience and training, but also incorporated a lot of the soft skills that either I developed or I had naturally, and it fits with my personality. So as a technology transfer professional, I suppose one of the key questions is like, what essential skills do you need to have? And this is using an example with this slide. The reason why I included it is because it will just make you think of some of these soft skills that almost apply to everything that you are going to do. It's not just the technology transfer profession, but also whether you are going to be in academia or in industry, because they do differ slightly. It is where, for example, here, the technology transfer professional, just off, if you were having a look, some of the skills that you need to have, obviously you need to have the background. This wheel shows the life cycle of new technology. So you would disclose it, it's evaluated, you protect whatever, you market it. Maybe it's going to be exploited by licensing. That leads to product development. And then obviously there's a return on the investment. But in actually going through all that, to be a technology transfer professional, there are some soft skills that are not necessarily written anywhere. There are unwritten rules that you'll need to have to be able to go through with this. In the lab, you can get away with working almost in isolation if you want. You do interact with others, but the thing is, it can be quite personal where you're leading that part of work. This is something that's quite different in the technology transfer profession, but also, and I'll touch on it later because it's on one of the later slides, in industry. Because the thing is, it is where you'll be working with others, but in a different way. And you won't necessarily be leading on it. It's a team, it's a tag team. And if you are leading on a certain bit, it will only be a part, and it may lead to others. You know, if you are the bottleneck, you could actually prevent things progressing as fast as possible, or you could be the link that could be seen as weaker. Communication is key, so that how you interact with others, how you exchange information is completely different. And this is a skill that you will have to develop regardless. If you are thinking of moving along, if you are thinking of progressing, the way you develop it is slightly different. If you change sector, if you change, for example, if you change sector, if you change how you are practicing, so profession, it will vary. But the thing is, it's a skill that you will need to work on. You also need to read people, because with the different roles and seniority, they do vary. For me, because I have to interact with IP lawyers, I have to be able to understand what they mean and what they are asking. But at the same time, I interact with the scientists. So I'm back there peer-to-peer, because I have to be able to dig into their science. But again, the business speak is something completely different. There will be some jargon, but the thing is, it's not necessarily the jargon that you have to understand. You have to understand the drivers of the individuals that you're interacting with. Another key skill, and I touched on it earlier, is having vision for any technology that you come across. You have to be able to see how this will impact the patient group, and really, will it work? So you're looking at the target product profile. Will it really fit in? Will it, if that individual is so ill, something that is very invasive, will that work? I mean, it's really looking, and this is where you bring in the expertise to ensure that that's right. The patient group who really work close with the patients, it's really where they may be able to advise on that and help a lot of the time. It may be the patient themselves, but also the regulators. Is that something that you really can do? One thing that I love doing is, as well as talking, is negotiating. And, you know, when you're negotiating, it should be a win-win situation. And I'm sure if you haven't read about it, there are talks talking about this. But you do have to be persuasive. It's not just the facts that are going to speak for itself. It is that, you know, you have to be able to highlight the advantages to the other person. And then this taps into communication skills. One thing that I will stress, and I think almost every researcher that I've spoken to, when I mention it, at first they think, oh, I'm not that good at it. But it's a natural skill that you need to have in the lab, and that's multitasking, organizational skills, and a lot of the time management. Because of the experiments, it's an almost innate skill that every scientist will have nailed. But if you come out of the lab and you have to apply it, it's really realizing how you use what you automatically have anyway. But it is something that is essential as a technology transfer professional. And the last point is what I've mentioned before, that marriage between your technical, legal, and the actual business skills that you will need to acquire to become a technology transfer professional. So I've talked a lot about the technology transfer profession, and hopefully you can see where there are aspects that you will need to consider, develop, but also you will need to really internalize and have a look what you have and what you would apply and what you would work on to actually use that expertise out of the lab. If we go back to the title of this talk, which was what is the middle ground? And, you know, I mentioned the 3 points that, you know, it could be sector, it could be whether you're practicing science in the lab or out. It's really where the middle ground in reality is, it varies for each individual because it's a personal aspect. It's not, this is the middle ground. For me, LifeArc offers the opportunity to find my middle ground. But the thing is, for each individual, their middle ground will be slightly different. If you're talking about sectors, then it is where, depending on the role that you have in that sector, it could be that your middle ground is, for example, within industry, but working very close to the science. So as a business liaison person, but it's very much that earlier stage research, that earlier stage translational research. Maybe it could be that. It could be that, you know, your middle ground is also leaning on another factor, the actual work-life balance, which is one of the key aspects that you have as a difference between industry and academia. But I wanted to say that, you know, when you're looking at your middle ground, it's not really something that's prescriptive and it's like, there it is, I'm going to go to it and I'm going to find it. It is something that you work towards, and you won't necessarily find it immediately. You have to gravitate towards it. You'll probably almost be there, but the thing is, like, you gravitate towards it, but it is a very personal thing. So I mentioned my career journey and that I would use it as an illustration. For me, some of the key aspects that I looked at when I was trying to find my middle ground is that I love science. That first slide, I do love science. I really do love it. And I get to see, not only do I get to dig deep into science and really use everything that I've learned through all the years and all the degrees, but I also get to, it's much broader. I did like specializing. My PhD was the best time ever in the lab because I had total academic freedom. And, it's very difficult to find that now, because the thing is, earlier and earlier, they're asking you, do you want to supervise? Do you want to apply for grants? And as soon as you become a postdoc, there's the pressure of having papers within a certain time frame. I enjoyed, for me, that the academic freedom was, that was the utopia of science. But I knew that I wouldn't be able to do that forever. So when I was looking and exploring and trying to find my middle ground, it was really where I was looking that I want to stay close to science because I enjoyed it. So I wanted to be a scientist outside the lab. And it was really where I wanted to be close to the science, not have some of the downsides. For example, the isolation. I'm a people person. So the thing is, like, some of the labs where they've got very few or no windows, it was quite difficult. The long hours, but also, I wanted to have that intellectual challenge that I had in the lab, but have it almost in a different environment. During my PhD, we were exposed to intellectual property because some of the technology was protectable, and it was, for me, I was all my research has been translational, very translational. So the thing is, where I was in the lab that's on the site with the hospital, but I wanted to combine my skills and passion, and some of these may not even relate to science itself. I love traveling. I love learning new skills. I also knew I wanted to have a work-life balance. And for me, to be told that as an academic researcher, this is what you need to do, and this is the path that you need to follow, otherwise you will not progress, that will just make me find another route. Because the thing is, I am a nonconformist. So the thing is, it was written on the walls that eventually I was going to leave the lab, and it was finding that time. I mentioned that it doesn't happen overnight, and for me, it didn't. It really is my last year and a half, maybe 2 years. I knew that I was going to be leaving, but at the same time, I was making the most of being there within the lab. But the thing is, although I knew I was going to leave, it was really where in your head, you have to really process the fact that science is going to be there, but it's going to be there in a different shape or form. So the thing is, to find that, what I want to say is to find that middle ground is that it takes time. And it does mean that you have to explore. And I'll touch some of these things that you need to do to really ensure that you do know what you're doing. So it's an informed decision. And it is where the fear that you will find, if anything, will drive you rather than make you curl up and turn back, because I do know people who have done that. But for me, in my case, as an example, it was the intellectual challenge of being in the lab, which was second to none. Job security, which I'll touch on in a minute, because that's really key based on industry or academia, but also the freedom to explore my skills, apply them in a different way. And I found that invigorating. It was amazing, because it's always been science. But when you have science and something else combined, you realize that you have skills and you have perception that you just don't realize in any other sector. And it's when you're talking with others that they probe how you process things, how you analyze things, that you have skills. And these are some of these skills, these soft skills that really are transferable and are important in anything that you do. So, not to digress and going back to the main title of this session, academia or industry, it is a natural, I think, regardless for any scientist, whether you're early career researcher, even further, much further along the line, it's a natural juncture that you will come across over and over again, because whether it's through opportunities, whether it's through discontent, or whether it's through the need for change and progression, you will actually have this where, okay, one or the other. Is it black or is it white? It's not as binary as that, and it shouldn't be. But unfortunately, in a lot of cases, it is. But it's really where, unless you are informed and you talk to people, it can seem that way. Let's have a look at some of the key things that will make, or the key differences when you're actually at this juncture that you consider. And one of the key things that we can't not mention is salary. It is, industry offers higher paid entry levels. They do than in the lab, unfortunately. Also what you'll find is the career path and progression is faster, but also it's really where it's more clear cut. You know what it is, you know what you need to do. Unfortunately, and you'll read this and you'll probably come across it and know it for real. It's really where in some academic establishments, you almost have to wait for someone to pass away before you can progress, because the thing is, it really is very narrow at the top. But also how it's assessed is really where it's quite harsh, and it's quite harsh if you have any career breaks. This EDI aspect comes into it. For example, if you haven't had any career breaks for childcare, if you make any decisions that really are against the normal standard practice in academia, it can be seen as something that could go against your progression or your perception, unless you're senior enough to actually make the decisions yourself. So there are real differences. There is a study that was done by scientists, I think it was the Scientist magazine, and it had looked at it's really European scientists in industry are paid 30% more than scientists in academia, and that's just at one point. So it's really, this is something that's key in finding your middle ground. It's also thinking about, as you progress, as you have more responsibilities, the lifestyle that you want to have. We're talking about career, but you cannot talk about career in reality without thinking about everything else around it. Stability is one of the key. For me, this was a key thing, because it grieves me even now to know that, unfortunately, most researchers are on limited contracts, and that stability, it's necessary, really. If you are going to give everything to your research, you shouldn't be worrying about the fact that you're trying to get a mortgage and you've got a short-term contract, or how the bank is going to see your contract so that you can't get it. It's really where, or you're halfway through, you're lucky enough to have a 3-year contract, and you're halfway through and you have to start looking towards where you're going to move next, because you're going to have to apply for positions and it might take time. It's really where you shouldn't need to have that. And for me, this was one of the key factors that really helped me make my decision. I wanted a middle ground that was not, when I left the lab, I basically said I will do everything in my power to not have a short-term contract again. It was just really where I wanted to move away from it as much as possible, because I thought it was just gruesome, and it was something that is lingering there as a researcher where you just don't need to have it. One of the key differences between industry and academia, which I've mentioned before, is how you work. Industry is driven by commercial, it has a business drive. And although it's science, it's still there, it's a business. Whereas in academia, this is where you have this passion, and it touches on the last point with work culture, this passion that as an academic, particularly if you have a project that you are leading on, you can be quite autonomous. You can, if you're lucky enough, you can have academic freedom. So you explore how it progresses. Obviously, you've got time restraints, funding, need to publish, but it is where there is a big difference between the two. And then I mentioned before the bottleneck aspect. In industry, you really do not want to be the weak link. But the dynamics are different in how you work with your individuals. You you will be responsible for things, but it may be that it's as a tag team. And that's something that, depending on what you want, how you work best, is really thinking, does that work for you? Where would you like to be? Would you like to have a mixture of the two, or one or the other? I've mentioned work-life balance, and this is a key factor. In industry, chances are your hours will be more set. There will be times where you will work longer hours. But the thing is, your hours will be more set. In academia, I remember still, I think I've been traumatized by it, but the thing is, like, it is where there would be many times that I'd have to call a colleague to come and escort me from the lab because it was so dark, and also it was so late, and I need to wait for the bus, and it just wasn't safe. But my experiments, they dictated that. I remember how many weekends your experiments dictate what you need to do, and it's not quite the same when you're thinking industry. It really is. It will be more predictable. Recognition and reward is something that this may be one of the ultimate compromises, because the thing is, up to now, there is still a thrill when anyone publishes anything, whether it's myself or anyone else. But the thing is, as a researcher, it is the driver, because the thing is, so much is dictated by the need to publish. Whereas, in industry, obviously you will still have these, but the thing is, you are paid, and that's the reward a lot of the time, and maybe promotion, recognition in that aspect. But these are key things that really do play on how you progress, and whether, how you find your middle ground. There's some take-home, these just a couple of slides that, the take-home message, and I'm hoping that it gets you thinking about some of these things and realizing where the middle ground sits for you. But if I had to give you some take-homes from this session, it would be, whatever you're thinking of doing, and I think this is for anything, regardless of what you're doing, whether you're changing sector, as I mentioned before, role, even your next position, I think it's really where these are things that you can take, and you will hear this over and over again, probably through others who will give a similar talk. And it is where you need to do your research. You need to understand the organizations and the sectors that you are interested in, and whatever you're considering. If you're changing sectors, do your research, read up on it. Not everything is correct, but the thing is, when you do your research anyway, which you do as a researcher because you read papers all the time, it is where you will start to get a full picture, and it will start to piece together what really happens and what really drives that sector and what changes are happening over time, because everything is moving. I can't stress this enough. And a scientific CV is very different to any other CV. And it's really where you need to write one that's appropriate for whatever you're planning to do. You cannot state, like, it can't be pages and pages, and you can't state, for example, how many papers and presentations you've made related to the technology when you're applying for something that, say, for example, is technology transfer. It's really where you need to update your CV, and it needs to be appropriate. There are tools, there are sessions that talk about the format, because also, depending on where you're applying, so for example, geographical territories, like it is where geographical locations, CV format and what's accepted is very different. And this is one thing to really take care of. I can't stress this enough. The next one, which is building a network, because networking is one of the key, as well as presentations, it's one of the key aspects that really is different when you leave the lab, or, even if you're still in science, but you're applying it to something else. You need to build a network, and LinkedIn is your friend because it's very easy to do that, or any other platform that does something similar to that. You need to increase your visibility, but for the right reasons. I can't stress how many times that I say to people, be careful with what you put on social media, or any sort of visibility that you have on social media. It is research, when you're researching anyone, you will look at every platform, whether it's professional or social. But the thing is, there are things that you can do to help slowly build your profile, which is almost like your online CV, in something like LinkedIn, because you can apply for positions directly from there. Talk to people. Goes with the research. It's not only reading, but also talking to people, attending events. There are so many free resources now, free webinars, free forum, free, it could be round tables, and you can attend them. And this is really valuable. The individuals you meet, you can question them. So informational interviews are invaluable in finding out. I can't stress also about learning. No matter what you do, you are going to be continuously learning, whether it's developing your transferable skills, working on your weaknesses, or even just learning something new, because it will help with that next step. But the thing is, get used to that. And it is where some of these are short courses, some will require a lot more investment, and some will be paid for by your employer. Others you may have to dig deep and do it yourself. But the thing is, it is something to keep doing, and it's rewarding for sure. This is one thing that I've done, and it's worked for me. And I know there's another school of thought that says something different. For me, it is where I believe that you should follow your passions and combine them with your strengths. It's worked for me because I get to do the things that I really enjoy, that mean a lot to me. If you enjoy it, you usually are good at it, or at least you'll keep practicing it until you are. But I think it is where you have one life and you have many careers. You ensure that those careers feed to and work with the lifestyle that you want to have. And I think these are key things that I would say to anyone. The last thing that I'd like to say really as a take home is you have to be brave and bold. And it does take some guts, because you're going to have some people not understand your thought. They're going to think you're mad. Why would you study for a decade and then leave it? You're not leaving anything. You are just you're moving on, you're progressing in whatever way you choose to do that. And what works for you, what is your middle ground, may seem completely off for someone else. And understand that and appreciate it. But the thing is, at the same time, it is stick to your guns, because it's your life, it's your career, and you're going to be the person who has to deal with that day in, day out. I mentioned the LifeArc course and fellowship program that I run. I just wanted to flag this, because the thing is, there is nothing like this, unfortunately. But the thing is, there are particularly overseas, that there are a lot of initiatives to try and help those who are thinking of applying their technical background. In this case, there's a fellowship program for scientists who want to become technology transfer professionals like myself. It's not a clear path, because there is no PhD in technology transfer. It's something that you would basically, it's part of your path from the lab or from your PhD, whether it's whatever technical area it is. But this will help pave the way and add some of those skills that I mentioned that you need to have, plus the support and the mentorship, which is invaluable. So I just wanted to flag these. It's something that if you want to know more, you can go to the link, or you can contact me for no problem. But I thank you all for your time and attention, and hopefully some good questions. And I've got you thinking.
Thank you, Anji, for such a fantastic talk. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm an early career representative at the BSGCT, and I'm on my final year of the PhD. So you mentioned so many important things to me. I am part of the target audience for this talk, and you touched on so many relevant points. Before we move on to the Q&A section, I just want to highlight our next event that will be happening on the 25th of April. This will be a research seminar. We're going to have Professor Laurent Servais from University of Oxford talking about his research on spinal muscular atrophy. So don't forget to register for that one. And now we can move to the Q&A section, because I have lots of questions and I see lots of questions coming from the audience.
Oh, fantastic.
Okay, so we'll start with one from the audience. From Olivia Kobe. You mentioned the difference in work-life balance in academia versus industry. How's the work-life balance in the tech transfer field?
The tech transfer field is closer to, the tech transfer field is closer to industry, because the thing is, even if you were in a technology transfer, like 2 roles ago, I was in a technology transfer within a university, and a lot of the time that's one of the first positions that you will have. It is more a 9-to-5 role. Obviously, there are times where there may be something urgent that you will be addressing, and you work a little later, and that's by choice. But the thing is, you're not doing, you're not working over the weekends, you're not working because your experiment dictates that you're there until 11:30 at night. It's not that way. And, in industry, again, it's the same. For me, I'm lucky that although LifeArc is a healthcare charity, it has traits that match with industry, but also with the academic sector. And then also it's a hybrid, a mix. And this is where, for me, it's worked, because that's aligned with my middle ground.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Kelly de Couteau. As someone coming from an academic background, I am concerned about my lack of experience in the law business area. Does this put me at a disadvantage?
Not at all. And your concerns are completely natural. You're a scientist. I mean, it's really where, this is why the fellowship program that I run is there, to try and help someone actually, because these are skills that you will have to gain. These are knowledge that you will have to gain. It is where, as someone with a technical background, the chances are, when it's put into context and why you need to have it, it will be enjoyable, really picking up these skills. But there are courses that, unfortunately, they are quite expensive, but also you can learn on the job. It is really a baptism of fire, because it can be quite challenging. Technology transfer offices are very busy, so you do have to be able to really pick things up quite quickly, but you can learn on the job. I did. But also what I did do, because I love learning and because I wanted to, everything I did, I wanted to have that level of knowledge. When I left the lab, that's when I did my master's in intellectual property. The business aspect of it, it's really where you can pick that up on the job, and you really do read around. But there's a lot of material now that's available online that will help you, and it takes it in baby steps. You don't have to learn all of these overnight, but your concern is, it's completely natural. There will be a fear as well, like, what have I done? Because, you're not familiar with the sector. But this is where I said the research is essential, and talking to others.
Thank you. I think that happens a lot after you are in the lab for a long time. You almost have that fear of missing out, doing experiments and all of that. So
yeah. It's also where you can still keep in contact with all these circles. If anything, it's broader, it's bigger, and it makes sense because they start to connect. Especially
in the gene therapies, that it's still
yes.
sort of a small field. Sorry. Okay, I'll carry on with all these questions. So this one, we don't know, we don't have a name, but what is the salary range for entry level in tech transfer positions, and how do they change as you go up the ladder?
It varies depending on if you're in a university technology transfer office, or if you're in like an establishment that has a technology transfer function. Obviously, with companies, it's not usually called technology transfer. It's something along the lines of business development or business liaison. It's very different. Industry will definitely pay more. Academia, I have seen, I'm not going to lie to you, because the thing is, like, it is where I have seen some positions where they start as low as 35,000. But the thing is, usually you're talking in the region of about 40,000 as a starting position. So you're coming in entry level into a position in technology transfer. Depending on where you are, it will increase, and it depends on technology transfer offices can be either part of the university or a separate entity. If they're a separate entity, it will progress more along the lines of industry sort of progression. Otherwise, university, it will go with the university spine and however they've structured it. But the thing is, it does increase. It does, and it is where, you know, these are permanent positions most of the time. It is where you'll know, you know, it's very clear how you're appraised and whether you're doing well.
It's good to know. We have a question from Robin Bell, similar to Kelly's question. Is there anything you could do during your PhD or postdoc to gain experience relevant for tech transfer?
Yes, I think it is where you will have a technology transfer office within your institution. Get to know them. They may even be able to offer you like a placement or something along those lines. I've worked with some of my fellows, because the fellowship program that I run is you actually take it whilst you're in your role. So you could be still in the lab. And it's really where you get buy-in from your supervisor. But I've also helped many of these fellows actually gain positions within their technology transfer office, whether it's for a couple of days per week or whether it's for a period. But get to know them because they're the closest and it's the easiest, they're on site. But also there are lots, again, these free resources that you can have. There are so many. If you look on LinkedIn, maybe in your network, you have people who are in technology transfer. If any of you connect with me, you will see past and present fellows, and you can see what they say and the advice that they give. And it really is where they're happy to talk to anyone who's thinking of making this transition as well. But I think as someone who's studying and to really incorporate it, sometimes there are modules that you can take. And it may be offered by your institution or something that you can access online. If you can try and relate it to what you're doing, it makes sense and it resonates a lot more. For me, I learned by not just reading, it's really putting it into what does that really mean. And I think you can do that a lot of the time with the chunks of information that's available that you can access. But if any exposure that you can have, then do it.
Very good advice. We have another question from Olivia Covey. Is a PhD required / common in the tech transfer field, or do you have colleagues with quote unquote just a master's degree?
And this is a common question, and it's really where it's not required. But if you don't have it, you do have to, you may in some cases be required to almost demonstrate that you can understand technology at the level that someone who has completed a PhD has done. Because you've got to remember, as a technology transfer professional, you may have a PhD, but I may be, in my role, I may be coming across technology in an area that's not advanced therapies, which is what my PhD is in. But the fact that I know the level that I need to have, the questions that I need to have when I'm liaising with the PI, and we're working through this together, you have to be able to dig deep into the science. And if you can do that, then you don't need to have a PhD. It's really where not everyone will. And like for my fellows, I've had fellows without PhDs and they've gone on to multiple roles. One of them is even in industry now. Basically, that's how it's progressed. But it is where you don't. It's just that you really need to show what you're capable of. And that's in your role once you're in there.
Yeah, I think that's a very common question among undergrads and students, like, do I need a PhD? Yeah. And this is just a personal view, but when my friends ask me about, like, oh, PhD, and people just assume, oh, you must be so smart or whatever. My answer always is, it's not really about being smart. I personally think that a PhD is more about being emotionally resilient, because there's a lot of, troubleshooting, and you need to be able to put up with failure such as good as you put up with wins. So would you say, so you don't need a PhD, but would you say it is a bonus? Like, do companies or in the tech transfer field, do you, like if someone asks you, would you recommend to do a PhD? What would be your answer?
I would, in all honesty, whether it's TT or not, I would only advise someone to take and study a PhD if they really want to and it's the right subject for them. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, that is 3 to 4 years of hell because the thing is, you realize that it's not what you thought, or it's not really what you want to do, because you're going to be exposed to so many different things during that time. And as you mentioned, it's resilience. Can you imagine that added to the fact that you really don't want to do it? You're 2 years in.
Yeah.
It's the expense, the sacrifices that you've made, or your colleagues are earning more because the thing is they may be working or whatever. I would only advise them to do it if they really, really want to. Luckily, and it's quite fortunate, particularly now in technology transfer, it's recognized that you don't need to have a PhD to be a technology transfer professional. If you have one, great, it does help, but you don't need to have it. And there are many successful technology transfer veterans now, and it is where they don't have a PhD. It's realizing that, but the choice should only be if you really want to do it, because even the choice of supervisor, the choice of location, it's all these things can factor really when you're for a PhD and selecting a PhD. Don't do it just to become a technology transfer professional. Only do it because you really will enjoy and make the most of the 3 to 4 years that you spend there.
Definitely agree with that. We do have a couple of more questions. And
sure. Great that we've got the questions. I like it.
Hopefully one of them is quick, but okay. So we've got a question from Elizabeth. How did your work change during the pandemic, and do you think this work is more flexible than academia?
Oh God, the last bit, do I think it's more flexible? Forget about the pandemic. It's more flexible, full stop. Because the thing is, for me, it's really where I have all these passions that, as you can see, that these interests that I've managed, and I'm quite happy about that. Over time, I've managed to incorporate in my role. But the work, how I work during the pandemic, LifeArc, because what we do, and because also, we did a lot to address the pandemic itself, which is not normally something, but it was really where everyone, it was hands down to try and address the pandemic. We were super busy. So it was business as usual, as well as, all these studies that we were working towards to help really support so that they could address the pandemic. It was really, really busy working. The fact that I was remote for a very long time, that really didn't impact like the work. But for me personally, because I'm a people person, I thought at the beginning it was just like, oh God, I'm going to be, working. I'm not going to be interacting with my colleagues, because I do love the banter and I do love seeing them. And I always had this thing from the lab, because when I finished my PhD, I had piles of papers and publications at home in my flat. And it was just really where that was never going to happen again. So I think in my mind, I wanted to separate where I work and where I live. The pandemic meant that didn't really happen. The separation was very small, but it took me about a year. But now I love it. It's really where the hybrid working, the only thing is that working remotely means that if you're not careful and you're not disciplined, you can overwork because you don't take the breaks. You have a lot of meetings in technology transfer. You have a lot of meetings anyway, even when you are out. So you have a lot of virtual meetings as well as in person. When you're working remotely, you can have back-to-back meetings. But the thing is, you could have back-to-back meetings throughout lunch, from 8:30 till whenever. So it's discipline that you need to have to ensure that you balance it. That for you, your mental wellness, but also time to refocus and also just live. That's the difficulty. But it's definitely, technology transfer offers more flexibility than anything. And I think the gift, if there is one for COVID, is the fact that people recognize that you can be more productive or equal as working virtually. You don't have, presenteeism is just, you don't have to be there to look as though you're doing the work.
Yeah, that's a whole debate topic.
I know, it's another talk.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I think I'm gonna have to start wrapping it up, but there's a last question, and a very important one from Sahin. What is the best way to contact you, Anji? from someone interested in asking a few
Yes, I mean, the thing is, you can do it. There are multiple ways. You can do it through email. You can, you know, it's Anji, anji.miller@lifearc.org, or LinkedIn. It's, have a look at my profile. I don't mind. Have a look at my profile. You can message me through LinkedIn as well. It's really, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. And it's really where, look on the LifeArc website. It's, you know, the fellowship program's there. A lot of the past and present fellows talk about their journey, where they are now. You'll see their positions. That will give you some insight as well. But also, you know, when you're reading it, remember that this talk was looking at finding your middle ground. And it is where that does vary slightly for each person. Because some of the things I factor personally for me that really mattered, you guys are probably thinking, but you know, it's really where your middle ground is based on your needs, your preference, and your lifestyle choice and career choice. So it's really where you can find it, and it may change. So it may be fine, the middle ground, but then 5 years, and then after that, your lifestyle changes and your middle ground needs to shift slightly. So recognize that, but you do have, as early career researchers, you have a lot more opportunities than you realize. And that's my final message to everyone.
Thank you. That's really encouraging. I'm sure after this talk, you're going to have a few people stalking your LinkedIn
Hey,
profile.
that's okay. My followers.
Excellent. Good stuff. Thank you so much, Anji. Hopefully we'll have another chat with you at some point, because
absolutely, anytime. There's so many things I could have tapped on, but yeah, anytime.
I know. Thank you so much for being here today, and thank you to everyone that joined us. And I think that will be it for today. Hopefully we'll see you soon.